Good morning, channel friends. Today I'm working on this chest of drawers. It has 7 drawers and I need it to put in a bathroom. Actually, these cabinets are really handy because they're narrow and tall, and wherever you put them, they always look good. However, today I want to use some techniques that I don't usually show in tutorials because I'm always a bit worried they might be misunderstood, and then you might use them on kitchens, doors, or furniture that gets a lot of wear and tear and end up with a disaster. So please, make sure you follow everything I say today very carefully without skipping anything, because if you miss even a tiny step, everything could come unstuck. Shall we start, Franco? Let's get started. Actually, I would have started straight away with our bar, but then Franco arrived and said that these handles are really quite nice, and I should take them off and polish them. Honestly, I would have painted them as well, because you know that if I'm not dealing with genuinely antique handles, truly old pieces, I have absolutely no problem removing them. But if they come off this easily, so effortlessly that I don't go mad like I am right now and I manage to save everything, meaning the nails and the handles, very easily and quickly, then why not? Let's make Franco happy. Right, Franco. So, jokes aside, here I've got a nail puller and my Geppetto spatula. I apply just a little bit of pressure on one side, really just a little, guys, because one thing you mustn't do in these situations is damage the furniture just to remove the handle, so only the slightest pressure. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a nail puller and I do this. I gently lever it, lifting from one side and then the other, without any effort at all. If you don't have a nail puller, no problem. Just take a screwdriver and do it with a screwdriver. We keep the old nails because they're always, let's say, useful. And I quickly put them all in a bucket with warm water. I have about 2 hand spans of warm water, and I add a glass of ammonia. And 4 or 5 tablespoons of baking soda. Both are essential because they create the perfect mixture that really helps to degrease the furniture. And when you're dealing with glossy furniture, you should never sand it. You give it a good wash with our bar, hot water, baking soda, and ammonia. I take a sponge for dishes and use the green side and gently go over the whole surface with this solution. Honestly, this mixture is absolutely amazing. Over the years, I've even tried degreasing kitchens and extractor hoods with other products, even much more chemical and dangerous ones. Nothing degreases as well as our bar. Not even the caustic soda, I can assure you. Of course, if you're dealing with kitchens or things that are much greasier, use our bar several times and rinse several times. Here, I'm not worried at all about the wood absorbing our bar, which is something you should be concerned about if you have untreated wood or furniture that's dirty and raw. Because this is glossy. So, since it has a glossy finish, firstly it doesn't absorb water, which is perfect, and secondly, we don't risk unsightly tannin stains appearing. So, for all of you watching who usually say, I always sand a little, it's better. Actually, it's not better because you remove the glossy finish, which doesn't bother Magic Paint at all. And what happens then? What happens is that you end up with unsightly tannin stains on Magic Paint, some pinkish, brown, ugly marks. And furthermore, this way we prevent the wood from absorbing the paints. This means you can strip it whenever you like and restore it to how it was before. Don't sand and don't strip the paint. Those are the first things we can do for a good restyling. So, I wash thoroughly, rinse well, and then we get started. For this small chest of drawers, I've chosen Bacio di Rosa as the base, but it will be completely transformed later. I apply it in a fairly perfect way. What does that mean? It means I'm not just interested in covering the whole base, but I absolutely have to cover everything in the intersections, inside the moldings. Unfortunately, this is something very few people do. What does that mean? It means that even when people start painting, usually the first coat for them is just a coat. But we don't fully understand that the first coat is actually the one that needs to cover up all of the background color. I start with a pointed brush, and if that's not enough for the whole surface, I can switch to another brush. And I've already prepared the Elizabeth brush aside. I load the brush well, because brushes, whether they're stubby, round, or thick, not thin, are made that way for a reason, not by chance, but because they have a sort of container, metaphorically speaking of course, that holds the paint. It holds the paint in the center and spreads it easily, so always remember that you don't choose a brush based on how nice it looks. You choose it based on its use. I go here and do you see? This is what the first coat should do. Get inside. Look here. With one single stroke, I need to cover everything that's the inside part of the moldings. Look. I can't expect full coverage from the first coat. A lot of people ask me if they need to apply 2 coats. Well, at the very least, we're covering a dark wood with a color that's still quite light. Bacio di Rosa is a hazelnut pink, leaning towards brown, a really beautiful color. But obviously, 1 coat won't be enough for complete coverage. Here now I take Elizabeth, the brush I was telling you about before. I load it up, because Elizabeth also has an internal reservoir. I load it like this. I gently remove the excess from the sides, since the reservoir. You see, it's nice and full. I go here, and this is my job now. I use the crossed brush stroke, if I want and if I need to, because often the rough surface and the crossed brush strokes help me fully cover every bit of the surface. See? And when I get here, I completely drain the brush, removing everything else from the surface. Look here. This is a very important thing to do, because we don't want to risk having brown patches when it's time for the second coat, otherwise it won't be enough to cover. I know it sometimes sounds a bit much when I talk like this, but actually, applying the first coat properly saves you time and money. Saving also means not having to do touch-ups after the second coat. You will have to do them, especially if you haven't applied the first coat properly. The first coat is essential. Also remember, if the first coat is applied well, when you put on the protective coating there won't be any streaks or issues. On the other hand, if you apply the first coat carelessly, when it is time for the protective coating you'll notice lots of marks. It's not the protective coating that causes the marks, it's the paint coat, almost always the first one. I'm also painting the top because I need an even color overall, so I go everywhere, even on the top, the front, everywhere with Bacio di Rosa. Here too, I'm applying it with a crossed brush stroke. Both ways, this one and the other. I try to load the brush quite well with plenty of paint, because it's starting to get warm today. And what happens when it's warm? What happens is that the paint dries more quickly. So, if I apply just a little at a time, I only risk it drying out and leaving lots of ugly streaks. So first one way, then I smooth. In the other direction. That's the beauty of working with a brush, having a lovely, neat, well-finished brush stroke. It's always nice to work with a brush. The brush marks need to be beautiful and precise. For the second coat of Bacio di Rosa, I don't proceed with a brush as I often do, but I use a roller and a molly sponge. I usually take the sponge and break it apart. This way, I manage to get a sponge that's even less perfect, less precise. Why do I do this step? Because I really need to have an inconsistent textured surface as a base for the next steps. I'm about to do. I've taken a microfiber roller, a medium one. In this case, I diluted it just a bit. I put roughly a tablespoon of water into the can I had. I had about this much paint, about 2 fingers, and I added a drop of water. This is what I want to achieve, with one coat, a fairly even color. Even if it's not precise at all. I've already gone in quite deep with the first coat, so now I'm not worried about anything. And straight away, I do this with the sponge. This step gives you a base that's absolutely imprecise and rough. And it will be perfect for absorbing the next steps. If you want to make this damp coat even more textured, Here's how you do it. I take a hairdryer and dry as I go over it with the sponge. You'll have quickly done a second coat, spending very little money, because we've made the most of the paint, and this way you also get a textured surface. What more could you want? Let's continue. To really understand the techniques I'm about to show you, you always need to think. Exactly as if you were painting a picture right now. The shadow is below, the light is above, and then there are intermediate colors. We have a base realized with Bacio di Rosa, which is quite a neutral, mid-tone color. Now let's move on to the shadows. Let's take a bit of London Fumé. I'll put a drop in a little bowl, just a small amount. Here I'll have about 2 spoonfuls. And I add a little water. Not too much. Why not too much? Because I want it to glide and flow, but I don't want it to lose its coverage. It still needs to be a grey that has a character. I need to keep a spray bottle, a mister, nearby. Whatever you have, don't go out and buy something specifically for this. If you've got an empty surface spray bottle, keep it, one of those that mists, and you can use that as well. I use this one here, which I really like because it has a large reservoir. I fill it up. Personally, I prefer it when these spray bottles produce a slightly larger droplet, not just a fine mist, because if I mist, I end up using too much water. With the larger droplet, I achieve the effect I want straight away without any hassle. Follow carefully, step by step, what I'm about to do, because I can't always explain it properly in words. I spray the surface so that it's wet, which makes the rest easier for me. Grey, so London Fumé, and where do I go? Where the shadow would be. I let it run a bit, I let it do its thing. I put it in the spots where I like it to drip and do its job. And I'm not worried, because underneath, I've already put the water. I really like the way it works like this, but it's not what I want to achieve in this case. If you like it, that's absolutely fine, but today the technique I want isn't about dripping. Now watch what I do. In some areas, I help it to drip even more. And then I take a heat gun. I want to stop the drop as it runs down using heat, lightening it with the sponge. I don't want to see the drips. I'm really not interested in that. I want the color to stay put. I work it very gently. Obviously removing all the excess and fixing the shade exactly where I want it. I don't want the drop, I repeat. I don't like, in this case, this dripping technique. It's a different technique. We'll use it in another way, at another time. Today, I really want to use the color almost as if it were a dark shade. Remember that colors applied to different surfaces in turn create different shades. So if you apply diluted London Fumé over the Bacio di Rosa, you'll get one shade. If you spread it over dark sand, you'll get a different shade. So keep this in mind. If here it's already starting to dry out, and you find that you can't really do the work I'm doing properly, don't use the heat gun nearby. You should only use the heat gun when you want to set the color in place. For example here, I'm missing a bit of color. I don't have enough in this corner. I'll add some here as well, increase it a bit, and before removing it, I help the flow. By adding a bit of water, I help the color to blend and go where it wants. I set it slightly, and in the meantime I go and work it with my sponge. And when I like the shade I'm achieving, the point I'm reaching, I set it. With the heat gun, if you don't have one, you can use a regular hairdryer. The only difference is that a normal one, unfortunately, has a stronger airflow, even if you keep it on low. As you can see, I've deliberately left a slightly lighter shade on top and a slightly darker shade underneath. Don't worry if in some areas it looks too sponged, because there will still be steps with two different colors, two different shades, which will completely change the surface. But it's important to understand that before doing the next steps, the grey London Fumé will have to dry perfectly. Because if it doesn't dry, it will really turn into a mess. I need to be able to recognize all the layers distinctly. For this intermediate color, I've chosen Madam. I've left a bit of dirty water from the previous London Fumé in my tray, and I'm using the same brush as before, very wet. I take a bit and put it here. I usually do this to show you, firstly, how little paint you need to achieve amazing results. And secondly, to show you just how highly pigmented my paints are. Chalk paints are not all the same. They don't all have the same thickness, the same grip, or the same pigmentation. So you need to be careful when you watch my tutorials and think that this can be done with any other chalk paint. That's not the case, because others, often, when you get to this stage where you add a lot of moisture, they start to peel off. This is the magic quality. Why have I used so little compared to the London Fumé I used earlier? Because I'll only apply a small amount in certain areas. Right now, my masala needs to be a matching color. Because in this room I have the ceiling in Madam color, a mirror in Madam color, and a piece of furniture in Madam color. So I want it to match the rest of the furniture and the walls in the room, but without being too overpowering. I want it to stand out, even if you don't like this color or if it doesn't fit in at all. In your own home, you can easily use an intermediate color. Here, for example, it could be royal green or sunset blue, or even caramello salato would work well, a brown that's a bit more rusty. I'm doing almost the same thing as before because I'm going to adjust it in certain spots, like here. From the corner. I want it to come in here and go down in a certain way, starting from here. I want this shading to stay where I want to. There we go. I'm going to soften it so it doesn't become too overpowering for my piece of furniture. And I leave just the slightest bit of Madam shading. You see here, at this moment I'm already even smudging it with the London. I don't want any drips, just as I didn't want them before. I don't want them now either. So I dab it straight away. I only want the Madam shading. That's it. I don't want it to go everywhere. I repeat the same thing on the other corner. As you can see, I started from the top. And now, with the sponge, I help myself to remove the drip. And blend gently. I have waited to pick up the heat gun because I want to control where I apply the color, avoiding the risk of going into areas where I don't want it, as you can see here. I've flipped it because this side is clean, so I can blend without risking getting Madam all over the place. I flip the sponge over again, and now I'm going to remove what I don't want to. I didn't use any water here. And now I simply do this. I rub, I remove, in this way. Often I even pick up the color that drips, that falls. I like working this way. And now I flip the sponge over again and lighten the areas where I don't want too much pink, too much masala.
Voila!
On this side, I'll stop. I don't want any more, but it's important that you understand one thing. Until it's dry, until it's set, the color isn't final. Right now, it tricks you. You need to let it dry before you can tell if it's right and before moving on to another area. Because, as it dries, it changes completely. Even the areas that are wet at the moment, once they dry, they lighten and change. So please, before you change and move on to another area, wait. Like here, the color is slightly thicker. When you dry it, it stays there. It sets, so you're left with a drop of more intense color. Look how it's changed. Here there was a streak. Now I'm drying it. I'm just removing the drop. But here the color will be more intense. Look. Drying it changes it. So please, if it's not dry, don't increase the tone thinking it's too light. When it's dry, if you still don't like it and want to intensify it, you're still in time. You can do it. But first, dry it completely with a heat gun or an ordinary hairdryer. It's always the same, but with what? With a light color, which for us is the highlight. I don't use a white, for example, nor Sophio nor cotton, because for me, let's say, they're too light in this case. I use dark sand, which is our sand shade, which is actually a light color compared to the rest, but not excessively light. I also put a little drop of it here in my bowl, and I dilute it quite a bit. Not too much, but enough. And this is one of the most important things. Remember that now the lightest part, so the highlight, still needs to remain quite visible. Because the light sits on the surface, just like the shadow needs to stay underneath. Here, you decide where to go. Certainly, in some areas you need to let the shadow show through, and in others you can, let's say, cover everything. I always dampen it, because I don't want it to stick 100%. I want it to glide in some areas, so that I can manage it later. You can only do this if the other layers are completely dry. If they're not dry, it gets really messy. And the colors mix, the shades blend together here. It's essential both to dampen in order to move things around and to dry with the oven at the moment you want to set it, because if you don't set it in time, it will come off. I start off slightly lower. I have to remember that, for me, this is almost like the mold that time has left on the furniture. In some areas I want more of it. In others I want less. I'll leave the passage anyway. You can see there's the transition of the lighter color, because it's time that created it as it passed by, but there's no full drop. I don't want that. Here as well, I lighten it up, and now I set everything. If you don't set it when it's like this, be careful, because if you wet it again, the shade will come off. Instead, what I want is to have all the layers. Here I want to see Bacio di Rosa, the London Fumé, the Madam, and finally I want to see the dark sand, especially in these areas where I've really emphasized it. If a drop is about to fall, make sure you stop it. Now, I still leave the sides a bit fuller. I like having this build-up of white here. And now also down here, where I wanted it to drip. First, I remove the excess strips like this. I move them where I need, without leaving a full drop, even here. I leave the trace, but I don't leave the drop. I stop it. If you don't apply this final light layer, you won't make the other two stand out either. It's essential to remember that the light layer, the highlight, also gives depth to the other two layers you've done before. I'd really love to see it with shades of green, perhaps with some brocante that creates a copper green, or maybe with corteccia that gives more of a rust effect. We often do this ourselves, even in the courses we run here at my place, on Fridays. We combine these shades to create this kind of rust effect. And if your sponge is stained with white, you can emphasize certain areas, and by using the hairdryer, you keep setting it. Maybe you want a bit here, where you haven't put any yet. The application will be very light, but it creates this delicate coverage. Look here now as it dries, how fine and delicate it is. Look, the color has settled gently, and it looks real. It looks as if time itself had left it there. Now I'll do the same on the front and on the other side. Don't be disgusted, but this here is the jar of vinegar and salt that I keep aside, sealed, so as not to waste it, with a nice lid for my handles. Now, what do? I've left my handle in vinegar and salt for about an hour. I take an old scrubbing brush, the kind you use for your hands, and a bit of hand soap. A piece of old soap. And I give it a good scrub. I've already cleaned 6 of these handles, so I know exactly what will happen. They're not gold-plated, but actually silver-plated. And this is what happens when you properly clean a handle like this. You remove all the dirt and oxidation from the years, but you don't end up with a golden handle. Now let's go over there, where, with jasmine oil and some steel wool, we make it perfect. These are some handles I've already gently polished myself. And now, watch what happens. Very fine steel wool, I run it over the handle. And as you can see, as soon as you clean it, a beautiful, modern, silver handle appears. Perfect for this piece of furniture, I'd say. Maybe gold would have worked too. It would have looked nice, but this is truly perfect. There are people who immediately use steel wool and oil, nothing wrong with that, but I prefer to soak them in vinegar and salt first, because it removes years of oxidation and cleans them very well. I really like that effect. Now they're also protected, so with a piece of paper, I dry them off and hang them onto the furniture. We took inspiration from a restyling done by one of our resellers, Sylvia Lopez Moran, who has a page, if you want to follow her. It's called Meraki, and it's based in Spain. She also does weekly live streams, always using Magic Paint, because she is a Magic Paint professional, a Magic Paint restyler, and also a reseller. We took inspiration from a live stream we saw around Easter on her pages. She actually painted some eggs with Magic Paint and then decorated them using this technique, simply with a pencil. A very instinctive outline of some leaves, some plants, and then she used a fine brush to paint the little leaves close up. Very delicate. Now, I really love this restyling and I already like it as it is, but actually I think something is missing and I want to make it more special. Here, on the front part, I want these plants to climb up. I'm not doing it here, simply because I already know that we'll be putting things down here. So there's no point, it'll just get covered. So we'll do it from here, letting them climb up, so that when someone is facing it, they can see them. Emma, with the pencil, starts sketching the lines by hand and I begin preparing the paint. We've chosen 2 shades because we want to keep it very smooth. London Fumé, a colour we've used, and Dark Sand, a colour we've also used. So we'll leave Madame and Bacio di Rosa on the cabinet. Right.
Yes, on the base.
Show us.
So, first I'm going to draw some lines using a pencil. They will serve as a guide to draw the leaves later. Obviously, with the brush you can add more to the sides as well. We only need a guideline.
I've put a bit of London Fumé and some Dark Sand, a dropper. If you don't have this, it doesn't matter, even some empty medicine droppers will work. We'll take a drop of water to slightly dilute it. This will help you reproduce it exactly the same if you ever run out of colour. We dilute it, but not too much, not for any particular reason, but because it still needs to be covering. We don't want a watercolour, we want a colour that holds the line. You can also just take a bit. Maybe put it in water bottle caps. That's a good method. Nothing gets wasted, nothing gets thrown away. See? I've put a teaspoon of colour and about half a teaspoon of water. Look at that consistency. You can see it's still very pigmented. That's what you want to achieve. Don't dilute it any more than this. Now Emma and I are going to have some fun and start painting the leaves at the bottom, at the base. Each of us has different manual skills, so they will turn out completely different. Right?
Yes.
As always. There's no right or wrong when painting is so expressive. She started from the trunk, I from the leaves. As you continue working on with the painting, if you realize you're missing a leaf, you can always add it in later. Emma starts with the pencil and does the second layer of plants, which I'll draw with the dark sand. The beauty of this technique is that the shades overlap. This way, we manage to achieve a much more three-dimensional effect. We can create our leaves by layering the shades on top of each other. In this way, they'll go over the shade that's already there. I'm applying the opaque protective coating to the furniture. I chose opaque because it doesn't leave marks. Once dry, you can't tell I've added protection. It's lovely because the surface still feels very velvety and is protected, but without showing any sign of protection having been applied. I use the Architetta brush because I like it and it works well in the grooves. And I apply it vigorously, always using, even here, a crossed brush stroke, because that way I don't miss a single centimeter. Voila! Now I want to show you in just a moment when it starts to dry, because you really can't see the difference. A really nice thing is that, even though the shade is quite whitish, as you can see, it still always requires being diluted. Remember that when it dries it becomes completely transparent, so even on very dark colors you need to spread it out. You need to apply it well, of course, but the whitish shade never remains, obviously. Now I'm going to carefully spread the protective coating once more, and now, using a hairdryer, I'll gently dry it quickly so I can show you how it looks once it's dry. Look. I'm using the heat gun to be even quicker. But in just a moment you'll see that it's dry and there's no difference. You can see it because in some areas the surface is already starting to look more matte, and look here. As soon as the wet gloss disappears, it goes back to being exactly as before, super matte. It's an exceptional product because it offers excellent protection, even for high-use items like tables and chairs, and you can't see it. So, in reality, this protection is truly fantastic. I'll continue the piece and place the handles. This restyling is also finished. As I said at the beginning of the video, the colors for this piece were specifically chosen because in this room there's a madam ceiling. There's another madam piece of furniture with a different technique, a wallpaper, and there's also a madam mirror. But I'm absolutely delighted about one thing. When I did the restyling of the mirror a while ago, with you, I added silver leaf and these handles turned out silver-colored. So it's the cherry on the cake. I'm really pleased about this. So I like the shade that this piece of furniture has taken on. It's difficult to work remotely since you must reinterpret a style. You won't see immediately how it looks. In the environment, you always have to start out determined. I knew grey would work. I was sure of it. And Madam was there. I chose a neutral base color and, to my taste, the result works well here. Always remember that it's important to reinterpret the techniques, doing them properly, following the key steps to make sure nothing peels off, that the paints dry well, that they cure, but you must always reinterpret them according to your own taste. Don't like the colors I've used? That's absolutely fine, use your own, but make sure you do it properly. Follow the right steps to ensure you respect the times of the restyling. Here we've protected it with a matte protective coating, so it will also be perfect to withstand the wear and tear you get in a bathroom, since we are in a bathroom, so you can place things on it. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, and so on. I'm pleased with this idea we came up with, Putting the designs only on the front means you can place useful items at the back, and the design isn't lost at the front, since it's right in front of you. I'd like to remind you the products used are exclusive to Magic Paint, where you can find them either on the elisayahome.com website, which is the only Italian site that sells Magic Paint products, or from authorized retailers, and not all paint retailers are authorized, be careful. You can only find them listed on magicpaint.it, divided by region. Go to them and ask for our products. Goodbye.